We just had like a 20-minute convo about Spielberg, and now we're like, time to talk about Carpenter.
Yeah, yeah. In the Mouth of Madness, 1994,
Yeah,
directed by John Carpenter, starring Sam Neill and like Charlton Heston, who I
yeah,
consistently forget is even in this movie at all. He
yeah,
was on
yeah.
scene for like a day.
I mean,
Um,
I'm pretty sure they did shoot all those scenes at least like a week, a couple days.
had to be. That's the
Because
way
he's
it
only
had
in
to
the
be.
one room. He's only in the one room. And they just keep going back. All they had to do was change the lighting rigs and shoot the next scene.
Yes.
But yeah,
And the feeling I got while watching this movie is
had you
I
seen
think
it
I
before?
appreciated it. Yeah, I saw it before when I was like 12 or 13. Like it's been a long time,
Mm.
very long time. I still remembered it pretty well, just because a lot of the imagery is like unforgettable, and
Yeah.
then the performance of Sam Neill is pretty unforgettable too. Like most people, when they think Sam
Reality.
Neill, well, I guess they think Spielberg. Maybe that's why we started talking about Spielberg earlier. They probably
Yeah,
think
I think it was.
Jurassic Park or Event Horizon, maybe even if they're not Possession fans. I normally think of this movie. This is the one I associate most frequently with Sam Neill. But the feeling I
Yeah,
got
me
watching
too.
it was like I appreciated it as much as you appreciated like disturbing behavior. And disturbing behavior
Yeah.
is like the ultimate your cult boyfriend movie with like everything I want to see in a movie. And I feel like In the Mouth of Madness is
Man, this
everything
is
Jacob
well,
wants to see in
yeah,
a movie.
a little bit. It's a very Jacob movie, I think. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And I'm a
Uh,
big Carpenter fan, but I actually only saw this movie for the first time like 5 months ago.
oh
I watched it.
wow.
Yeah, I've seen it several times since then. Actually, I've watched this way too. That's why I was joking. I think you saw that. I was joking about how every year I have a Carpenter movie I obsess over for the 12 months, and then I move on to something else. Last year was Prince of Darkness. I watched Prince of
Prince of
Darkness like,
Darkness is dope. I like
yeah,
this
it's
more
probably
than
my
Prince
favorite.
of Darkness. This is pretty high up there on my favorite Carpenter thing. I am boring. I do
Yeah.
think that Halloween is my favorite Carpenter film,
Oh,
followed by
Halloween's
like Escape
phenomenal.
from New York. But then this one would be a solid number three.
Yeah, they compete for me. I would say either this Prince of Darkness or The Thing. The Thing was the one I saw the earliest, but Prince of Darkness and In the Mouth of Madness are the ones I've like obsessed over the
Oddly enough,
most. Like,
I'm like, I don't know. I'm like over the thing. Like I left that when I
I feel
graduated high
that.
school. Like I don't know if that's gonna irritate people, but I just
No, I
haven't
mean
been
like it's one of those movies that's
what
like
a loser. I just got a text. You know who from?
Justin.
Yeah,
Ah,
saying and invite me to the meetup, to the hangout when you're done. No, no.
no.
Oh, we're
But
talking about cool fucking alpha shit like Sam Neill. He doesn't. Oh, well, Possession. He makes a lot of
yeah,
Possession
no,
videos.
Justin loves Possession. But
Justin would love this movie,
I
I
agree.
think.
I think so. I adore this movie. Yeah,
I was
I love
bringing
this
it
movie.
up on Twitter and things like that. There's some like Sam Neill is requested to do such extraordinarily outrageous things in basically every movie. If he's not acting against a CGI dinosaur, like
Yeah, I didn't
fucking
realize that when I was a
Isabella
kid.
Johnny, like body horror monster, like he's probably like a master of the like extreme differences in tone and all of that. Like he's hilarious. He's got amazing comedic timing. But in that same moment, like he does in Event Horizon, like he could be so creepy and scary and
Yeah.
weird. Like
He's one of those guys also like I never know what accent he has.
I
Like
always
it
forget he's a New Zealander. I always
well
forget.
it's because he in like movies like Possession he alternates between like an American accent, an Australian accent, a New Zealand accent, and like something approximating
Yeah,
British. But here he kind of does like the what do you call it? It's the like continental accent, like the old
yeah.
Hollywood type of accent. Like he does that here, but he kind of slips into it. But I don't know. I love it. If anything, it's more just he's like a very uncanny actor. He's got kind of like a Nick Cage energy, and I don't mean that like despairingly because I like Nicolas Cage. I mean more as like an emphatic screen presence that's not at all camp, but not at all natural. It's just this overwhelmingly expressive screen presence that all yeah he's a lot like Nick Cage I guess in that way, but super interesting to watch. I never thought about that until like literally just this moment, but yeah, no, I love
Uh,
Sam Neill. He's so
I'd
interesting to
love to see
watch.
if they traded filmographies. I think they'd still be pretty good movies.
I think Sam Neill could have done Wild at Heart, but
I think Sam Neill could have done Con Air. I think Nick Cage could have done Nick Cage could have done this movie. I think, and that's saying a lot.
Yeah.
I'm not
Oh yeah.
crazy. This is not reality.
This is not reality. No, eh,
Uh,
God, I don't know where to start with this movie. I mean,
um, it's just good. How about I start with like a criticism I read, like
sure.
because I was kind of surprised to see that it's a cult movie, which is fine. I'm your cult boyfriend, and I guess I just do cult movies now, which is
It's
cool.
kind of a weird like middle area where it's like people simultaneously think it's like not the best,
Yeah,
but also like the last great Carpenter movie, and it kind of occupies both of those roles. Although I disagree, I think he did good stuff after this, but like it has that rep, like it's simultaneously really good and also like whatever. Seems to be
well,
the
I have an awkward, deep affection for like vampires and Ghosts of Mars that came out
yeah, I
after
like
this.
Ghost
So
of
I don't think
Mars
this
and
was
no, and I like cigarette burns, but yeah.
Hey, Norman Reedus just put up a video on Gossip. Norman Reedus is the shit, man. But anyway,
Yeah,
the
the criticism you read.
the criticism that like I don't know, I might actually agree with. It was from like establishment reviewers, so I feel weird like agreeing with it, but uh, they typically applaud the film, and this is like the general critical consensus too, with several people saying this. Like they typically applaud the film for like its inventiveness, for its visceral imagery, for its like unpredictability. But they say like that John Carpenter is like on the verge of making like some sort of profound or vaguely interesting statement, and then just never commits
Oh, I don't
to
agree with that
actually
at all.
making the statement. What do you think?
No, I don't agree with that at all. I mean, I admit like it's complicated with Carpenter because I feel like so in most of his movies, the most interesting ideas are largely like peripheral and alluded to. Like Prince of Darkness is all about just you know fear of the unknown and fear of the self. Like it's largely expressed through visuals, like Prince of Darkness, and I won't spoil the end, but like there's a lot of Prince of Darkness with like mirrors and shit, and they never imply or say outright like this evil in the self, but it's always evoked in the visuals. And I think this does the same thing where it alludes to like a million different things, but it always in passing. Like the one of the biggest parts of the movie that I feel like you could almost watch the movie and miss that this is a major part of the movie is that the world is fucking ending in this movie. Like literal, like they talk about like I think it's implied to be like ecological disaster, like the environment is collapsing, the like social unrest, they're implying there's like riots and people getting angry in the streets and protesting, and it's like you don't see any of it, and they always kind of just like flitter past that and mention in passing and then go anyway, Sutter Kane. So I kind of get why people walk away
But
feeling
it's
like there's
not
not
like
much of a text. It's important. It's what the whole movie's about, really, because I feel like the whole movie's about this kind of it's an apocalypse movie. Like obviously it's part of like his quote unquote apocalypse trilogy. It's the conclusion after the thing in Prince of Darkness. But like it's very much a movie about like a world that just feels like it's like actually falling apart. Like not in the future, not in like 20 years, like literally as we speak, the world is like falling apart, which might be why I relate to it so much right now, because that's what it feels like right now. But yeah, no, there's because it dives into that. It dives into this like idea that like I don't know, like pop culture is literally satanic. Like,
well, you see, that's the part that like vaguely interests me, but it's like it implies that the end of the world is ecological, but it hyper specifically says that like the world's ending because like Sutter Kane's like writing it, like self-fulfilling prophecy. It's just that so many people believe it, so it's true, which is
it kind of tries
completely
to do both. Yeah, it tries to do both. It
it
tries to
tries to
imply
do
that
both,
like
but it like doesn't commit to either one fully.
yeah,
I think it commits to the Sutter Kane one the most, which is
it it
like I
it
like the idea
implies
of
that
pop culture being satanic. That's fun, but
it implies I think that like these Lovecraft elder gods uh sort of came into contact with Sutter Kane, and so Sutter Kane, because of his contact with the elder gods, he becomes like this in himself a god, which itself is like a very Lovecraft thing. I have a lot to say actually about like the connection of Lovecraft here because it's pretty interesting, like how it deviates. But no, it does this thing where it's like the gods are like giving Sutter Kane this power and then using him as just like a vessel through which to
Yeah.
corrupt humanity. And
Well, that
so,
would be the argument for the pop culture is Satanism thing. You
yeah,
know, Satan
exactly. It's like
uses, yeah, pop culture
literally
as a
evil.
proxy. Yeah, Satan
It's
uses
like,
pop culture as a proxy. Like,
yeah, it's literally evil. It's literally, and you can probably glean from that like a broader, like, I don't know,
yes. Yeah.
the
So what's
prophet,
specifically like
the
interesting about that? Is it like
the
the
pro, like the
absurdity
pro.
that?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's a few things like just like the profit motive itself is like evil, but I think more than that is just this idea that like the culture that like I don't know how to word this. Like our like the culture we live by and the media we consume is like literally evil, literally a corrupting force, literally like just not a good thing, or things that are supposed to be John Trent, Sam Neill's whole thing is that he's like, they're just like, fucking genre books, they're pulp novels. What do they matter? And then it's like, no, like they have an impact. Like like the media matters, I think is the ultimate endpoint. Like pop culture has an ideology, it has a motive, it has a goal. It's not, it doesn't exist in a vacuum, which is I think the broader thing going on here. He kind of gets back into that with Cigarette Burns, but it's more interesting or different there because Cigarette Burns is like about Euro art house and how Euro
Yeah.
art house is like this transgressive force. Here it's more about like the Stephen Kings of the world, or I would compare Sutter Kane to like a J.K. Rowling, like a you
Yeah,
know
I would compare Sutter Kane to Stephen King. I mean, the thing seems pretty thinly
Yeah,
veiled.
it's the most obvious
But
one. They even say it by name. Although again,
what I
like I
want
think like
John to be doing though is like commenting on himself, and I think he is sometimes. But
he
if he
does.
is, and he doesn't have like too much to say,
It's
like about his craft, like it doesn't feel like, you know,
John.
like I have
No,
to
John.
agree with some of the criticism in that like I feel like Carpenter's like commenting on himself and the kinds of genre films that he does and the kinds of like reactions he's gotten from the public, but then it's just
I mean,
bad taste.
John's. Yeah, I agree. I mean, John's an interesting character because he becomes like less important as it goes on in a way, or you come to realize he's not as important because in the beginning he's a very defined character with a very like is a very clearly defined relationship to what he's doing. You know how he feels about what's happening, but then you get to the end and you realize he never had any agency to begin with, and all of that kind of disintegrates, and all of his criticisms of the things he's seen kind of disintegrate, all his opinions disintegrate, and you realize like he's not actually in any way like a tool for the ideas of the movie. He's more of like a surrogate for the viewer, but which is interesting. He's kind of like a Snake Plissken in that way, in that he, you start the movie and you're like, oh, Snake Plissken's a cool motherfucker, and then you get, as it goes on, you realize he's kind of more a passive observer to everything going on around him. He's because there's not like much action in Escape from New York, so he's like you're kind of through his eyes as like a surrogate for the viewer, which I think is interesting. I don't know.
And that makes it interesting if we can extrapolate from that, like since he is like the he is the unknown like focal point or hero of the new Sutter Kane novel or whatever, or the end of the world. It's just the narrative
Yeah,
of the end of
both.
the
He's the
world.
hero of the end of the world. He's
And
like the last man on earth at the
yeah,
end.
and just superimpose that character onto the audience kind of makes
Mm.
the audience implicit in this story that they have no control over, because you wouldn't have any control over the end of the world or elder gods or anything either. Like that could be pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree. And he is in his own way kind of like actually this is where I think like the kind of I don't know what you call like schizophrenic quality to Sam Neill's performance I think becomes really interesting because like in the beginning of the film Sam Neill is a very like archetypal character. Like he fits into an archetype that you can clearly like latch onto and you make sense of very very early on. So like you don't really know much about him or his life like prior to the events, you don't really need to. He just fits that role completely. And then by the end of the movie, that role is completely gone. Like that cynic, the skeptic, it's completely gone, and he starts just moving between different like personalities, different traits, like different attitudes, different feelings, and he like completely loses his sense of self, and you no longer know how to like I make sense of his character. If that, I don't know if that makes sense. I thought it was interesting, just because he's such a like you said, like Sam Neill as an actor will go from like scary to funny to freaked out to sad in the span of like a 30-second
This
sequence.
movie is very. I'd call this movie a black comedy for sure. I think that
Oh, it's
that there's
so
so
funny.
much
The
amazing.
the the innkeeper that like hacked her husband to death, and he's like naked and handcuffed to her leg, and she's like hitting him. She's like, "Shut up!"
It's
It's
amazing.
so funny. Or all the shit where like the whole end of the movie where he's just looking at footage of him screaming, "I know reality," and he's just watching it from the audience, like
That's
laughing at his own misfortune.
that is easily like one of the most interesting things I feel like John Carpenter's ever filmed. That
Yeah,
to me is like there's so much in that part, in that one, like him alone
yeah,
in that movie theater eating popcorn, like just escape from the mental hospital with all these crayon crosses all over him, laughing
yeah.
at his own insanity. That's perfect. There's so much there. It's
And
I'm not
I think
criticizing the movie too much. I'm just that part though. That part we can like
it's
talk
it's
about
beautiful.
for hours. I can't really talk about the preceding part that long.
I actually think there's a lot of kind of editing like that scene throughout the movie. Like you get a lot of repeated shots throughout the movie, like the shot of him in the alleyway that doesn't really seem to have like where is this alley? When is this happening? You don't really know, and it keeps repeating throughout the movie, and then you keep going back to the shot of him like looking at the poster. Um,
Yeah.
and then you get to, and which makes sense because you get to the end of the movie and you realize like his entire conception of time has just gone out the window. He walks back into the office and he's like, dude, you've been here for 6 months and shit like that. Like yeah, Carpenter completely just fucks with your sense of like continuity throughout the movie, and but also obviously Sam Neill's sense of continuity. It's actually pretty funny. And what one thing I would say though is that it is weird. You feel closer, I think, to Sam Neill in the last half of the movie. In the first half, it almost feels like I can't remember her name. The editor, Sutter Kane's editor,
I was about
who
to bring her up because I loved her as a character.
yeah,
Sam Neill and her had a great that's a good comedy
they have
duo
great
right there.
yeah, they have great chemistry. And she's like you're introduced to Sam Neill and then you're introduced to her and then she becomes something approximating like a guiding character that you associate with until she for all intents and purposes dies, and then you shift back to Sam Neill. It's pretty weird, but no, I really like her character. I really like her character a lot, especially because you're asked to identify her with her only to find out that like there was shit she knew that you as a viewer didn't know.
Yeah.
Like the fact that it actually was a phony insurance, like it was insurance fraud, but then they got there and they were like, you this wasn't how the insurance fraud was supposed to go down, but it looks like insurance fraud this way too. So now what, I don't know how to prove this to you. Because they
Oh,
were supposed to go down there and not find a town at all, but then they go down there and find a town. So they got shit.
this movie is really a pure blast. There's so much energy in it, and it's just I mean the movie is simply wild, but I love a lot of it. I just have no idea. Maybe you can go into your
How to
elder
like
god thing. Like what
cohere
is
it.
it? What is it trying to tell me?
I I see it, like I said, I see it more as like a collage more than anything. I think that's a common Carpenter thing. I mean, I guess Prince of Darkness has like a pretty coherent thesis, which is that like we don't know shit and never will. But
And Cigarette
this
Burns is like has a thesis too. Like Cigarette Burns
to be
trying to
fair,
tell me something
Cigarette
about
Burns is like 50 55 minutes. But yeah, this I think it's like I said, I think it's more just first and foremost of intending to inhabit genre, but then like reflecting back on that genre and then interacting like going back to interacting with the genre and just origamiing it to hell and back until you don't know basically until you have the reaction you had. But I think it's more about what you glean from the very signifiers it offers you, because again, it offers you a lot of like signifiers of ideas and a lot of that don't seem to connect until like the viewer puts in the effort, I guess, if that makes sense. Like again, the link between like what does say I, they call him like a cash cow JK Rowling type like Uber writer who makes millions of
Mhm.
dollars have to do with ecological disaster and social unrest. And I don't think Carpenter's going so far as to say, you know, like books make people bad. You know, I don't think he's going for like the, you know, like
I mean, in
violent
fact,
video,
he's
violent movies make
affirming
people
that idea.
violent. Yeah, yeah. I don't think he's
It's
going
a
straight for like,
satire of that criticism. It's a satire of that criticism, I think.
it's a satire of that criticism, but I also think it's very nonetheless like very critical of pop culture, but mostly into like I don't think he's saying that pop culture is something that makes people bad, or you know, like I don't like he doesn't think like violent movies make people violent, for example. Like I don't think like if anything, I think that'd be like too simplistic a goal
Yeah.
for Carpenter, for someone like Carpenter specifically, because he's always about like a broader context, like how Michael Myers is specifically an evil that came out of like upper middle class suburbia, and that you know, and he goes back and eats upper middle class suburbia alive from the inside. This, I think, it's more about just the idea that the media we consume might actually just be evil or be used to convey messages we don't want, and we internalize those messages, but we also don't take seriously the threat from them on the grounds that it's, you know, just genre. That's just like, it's just a movie, it's just horror movie, it's just, you know, like you know, someone might read like Stephen, like a Stephen King novel and say like, what harm could that possibly do? But then I think Stephen King himself, like we were talking about, like shit Spielberg fans have done to Spielberg. Like I'm pretty sure that some of the same shit has happened to Stephen King. He wrote a book about it. In fact, wrote Misery. So yeah, these things like don't exist in a vacuum, and I think that's why I take this as a more political film, just because it
Yeah,
asks.
there's something about it. Like, I think John Carpenter can be extremely nihilistic, in my view.
Yeah, this is a very
This
nihilistic
one is,
movie. Super
yeah,
nihilistic, 1 million
exactly.
percent.
Like when I think of, like, I think that I feel that Halloween and Escape from New York and The Thing are pretty nihilistic fucking movies. And this is kind of no different for me.
I
But
completely agree.
there's such a glee in it though. Like, this is his most like the fact that we end with Sam Neill laughing,
He
like,
enjoys it. He's like literally the last living man in the,
yeah.
presumably at least in this city. He's the last living man. The whole world has gone to shit. He played a part and he just doesn't give a fuck anymore.
Because like I think of like those big ones I just named, and like of course like I don't give a fuck if I'm spoiling classic movies. Like Halloween like ends with like this Lovecraftian monster being unending. It's still there or whatever. It's still very
Yeah,
nihilistic. That the thing is like, well, one of us is a fucking is a fucking monster, but we're just gonna like smoke and drink, and then one of us is gonna kill the other. And like Escape
yeah,
from New York, there's justice involved, but it's still like,
yeah,
you know, the Snake doesn't get to like stand in the spotlight, but he does get to fuck over Donald Pleasance and like hang out with Lee Van Cleef for 2 seconds. Like it's still like
hmm
a justice, but it's a justice that doesn't necessarily mean anything.
yeah.
With
No, I
this
agree.
one, it's like it's difficult to like articulate, but it's definitely the happiest. It's the
I mean,
happiest he's allowed a protagonist to be at the end of his film, given that he's lost everything, including his own society and world.
and also himself to a degree, because he's realized
Oh,
like
oh yeah,
he
completely
himself is
lost
not
himself.
like a fucking person, or and like even if you take it to mean like he, even if you like take that with a grain of salt and you presume like nah, he's a real guy who's just like fucked around by Sutter Kane, like he's still like he has no sense of time and place anymore. Anything he says or does can be retracted, you know, like he met a, like this woman he went there with no longer exists, you know, he cannot trust anything, you know, there he cannot trust the reality around him anymore. It's completely gone. He has nothing to rely on. He exists in like a la la land for the rest of his life until he, you know, disappears into something. It's really dark. It's really, really dark. And I think he does pull that because like that, I mean, that is a Lovecraft thing, and because like Lovecraft, so many of them end not with with the main character actually dying. Like some of them do, but a lot of the time, like they don't die. They just like they're like, oh fuck. Like in the Mouth of Madness, or sorry, at the Mountain of Madness, which is the namesake of this, obviously. At the Mountain of Madness, which is I read that in high school and it fucked me up, and I've never been right since. It ends with like the two guys get out, not to spoil it, but like the two guys get out, and then one of them looks behind him and he sees something, you don't know what he saw, and he looks back and he's just gone. Like he's crazy for the rest of his life, and the main character has no idea what he saw. He just knows like this guy turned around and saw something, and like this is after they saw like two monsters, but he saw something else worse than those two monsters, so horrible that he just went insane. And the other guy's like, oh, that's gonna happen to me. And Call of Cthulhu ends with the main character like finding all this information about Cthulhu, and then he realizes every other person he's like read the notes of along the way who found this information about Cthulhu had mysterious accidental deaths within like a few weeks of that happening. So he's like, I'm just gonna die, and he's like, there's nothing I can do about it. It's gonna happen, and like it could happen next week, next year, I don't know, but it's gonna happen now. So I that happens a lot. The one thing that I think is different though for Carpenter with how he interact, because for the record, I think Carpenter is like by far the best Lovecraft type director, cosmic horror. Like God love Stuart Gordon, like bless that man. But I don't think he actually was ever like in touch with Lovecraft as a text. He kind of just like the aesthetic of Lovecraft, and he worked with that in an interesting way. Like Carpenter gets it, I think, like gets in a very like visceral way. But one thing he does, like so much of the horror in Lovecraft revolves around obviously racism. Like dude was a goddamn eugenicist. It's mostly in the realm of like corrupted blood and shit like that, like mixed blood, dirty blood, like that kind of thing. Like the idea that you're of mixed race is usually like the source of horror. It's a very racist thing in Lovecraft. It happens in like Shadow over Innsmouth and the Dunwich Horror. It's all about
Yeah.
corrupted blood. Carpenter here, he kind of for the best ignores that element, which a lot of Lovecraft directors don't, and I think that shows why a lot of directors don't know him that well, because they don't like acknowledge that implication.
Yeah.
Here he goes straight for like, no, the body doesn't matter, it's not about the blood, it's all just like the fucking mind, and the mind is molded by like the culture surrounding it. And I think that's where he goes. He goes instead of like a corrupted like evil body or bloodline, he just goes straight for like the world around the body, like the culture, the media you consume, shit like that. I think that's where the Lovecraft element like ties into that, like the mass media thing. Because he's
No,
saying,
absolutely.
yeah, if that makes sense. Like I think that's
No,
what
it
he's going
completely
for.
does. This movie feels so similar. Did like New Nightmare must have came out like the same-ish time.
I think they did come out the same year. Yeah, I think they did.
And since every video I do is secretly a Scream analysis, I think that even The Mountain of Madness and New Nightmare are like excellent precursors to like to those postmodern '90s, late '90s movies. I
Yeah,
mean, as you're saying, it's definitely about how we interact with media, and like it does beg the question of not if it informs our lives, but how much. And of course, Carpenter goes uh, absurd with the idea so that like it informs not only our lives but the world around us, like
yeah,
the very fabric of reality.
and
But it's an excellent precursor to the screams and the faculties and disturbing behaviors we get like just within like 4 years from this. It's kind of
mm,
wild. New
yeah,
Nightmare was the same way, definitely, with talking about whether or not media, and in the same way as Carpenter, Craven with New Nightmare was interested in whether or not the process of creating art itself, like, fed into this cycle of like destruction and apocalypse stuff. Like, it was the
and
same.
obviously he dipped like within a decade of this coming out, in part because like he was
Mhm.
completely miserable with you know mass
Yeah,
media itself. I mean, obviously he
that's
came
an
back.
excellent
He's
point. But like Carpenter using media as a Lovecraftian villain, that's something
yeah,
that none of them followed through with. None of them. That's something really fascinating, actually.
yeah.
Uh,
And again, like I love like From Beyond and like Dagon and Reanimator, and shit like that. But I'm like, it's not like there's a clear difference. I don't walk away from those movies being like, oh shit. Like
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't walk away from Reanimator asking you what the hell was Stuart Gordon trying to tell me.
yeah,
Like, I'm pretty satisfied knowing what I was being told. Reanimator.
yeah, I guess that's kind of the problem is that Lovecraft has kind of become more an aesthetic thing today. Like a brand in himself, whereas like his originally, the whole idea was that how could you fucking commodify something like this?
Yeah.
100, like a 90-page book written like an essay in which everyone goes crazy and dies and the universe means nothing.
Well, it's
It,
wild. I guess that's the major thing that would separate Carpenter from like postmodernists, like I think even Wes Craven or Kevin Williamson, is that
the
for him
darkness.
the Lovecraftian media monster is like almost non-corporeal, like almost you can't imagine it. You have to experience it in these visceral like jumps, edit like these fantastical
Yeah.
images.
And
But like
I mean,
it's not physical. Whereas like with Wes Craven
yeah.
and Kevin Williamson, it's not only physical, it's the boyfriend who's fucking like
Yeah, yeah.
that's
And
it.
you do get some like intermediaries, like you get like the whole opening sequence of like the process of putting together the books, but like obviously it's like what's contained in the book. So I think that like that's mostly just there to put the idea in your head that you should pay attention to like the media element of it or like the process of getting that to the because you also get like shots of like stores selling books and
Yeah.
stuff like that, and that's where everyone's fucked up lines outside, like the when Trent murders one of Sutter Kane's fans with an axe at the end, which is something I always forget every time I watch this movie now, that he murders a dude and that's why he's in the hospital. It's
And
because
what
he like
about those who don't read? They're making a movie.
movie. Yeah, like that's a fucking scream line, but like that it's so great. And then has like John Carpenter on the poster outside, which is more kind of a silly Easter egg than anything else, because I think he's like up until at that by that point had sufficiently implicated himself in the shit. Although
Yeah.
I mean, to a point, I guess. I don't know how much you can say like Carpenter's implicating himself here. I only say that because like at the height of his career, he was never that popular. The Thing did garbage. Everyone hated it. People hated Escape from New York, if I remember correctly. Halloween took time to get traction. So like, I remember I saw a thing once where Guillermo del Toro at like one of those like horror director get-togethers had dinner and he was sitting next to John Carpenter. He was talking to John Carpenter. He's like, man, it's so great that like the Thing has an audience now, and like you struggled so much when it came out, but now like people really love it. And he says, well, what fucking good does that do me now? Because like he didn't get paid, he didn't get any money out of it becoming a cult classic, or he probably does now, but like for a long time he didn't, so I get what he's saying. Like he's kind of always been exterior to pop culture. He's probably more implicating guys like obviously Stephen King, or if we wanted like a contemporary analog, I don't know, who's a horror director like
There
artist that
isn't.
people like. There
He
isn't.
doesn't have an analog, honestly.
I don't know. I mean, again, funny enough, it's still mostly in the realm of like music and books. 'Cause I still think like
Not ones that
books.
commit this heavily to Lovecraftian elements. And that's probably what makes Michael Myers so interesting, is that he's a human character with Lovecraftian
Oh yeah.
characteristics. I mean, every other time it's like the fog with these like unreasonable pirate ghosts. Like it's like always this strange supernatural quality
I
that a lot
actually
of directors don't really like don't really commit to too much. Like James Wan likes to dip in supernatural, but I wouldn't call him like a Carpenter type of dude.
I actually wrote a
Well, maybe because he does those shitty
he
action
does
movies too all the
he
time.
does a
So, I
few of
mean,
them.
maybe.
I haven't seen them, but I'm familiar with them. I
Well,
did.
only Carpenter would look at like Fast Seven and followed by The
Oh, I'm
Conjuring
sure he
2 and be like,
loves
that
it.
makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Good on
Dude
you.
spends all day playing like Call of Duty. I'm sure he loves it. But I wrote a review a little while ago. I think actually around Halloween, last Halloween, um, of Halloween. And I talked about how like you watch the whole movie thinking it's a slasher, and then you get to the end of the movie and you realize it's an adaptation of the Dunwich Horror because it's about
Yeah.
like the monster that had been like growing in the attic for like 20 years in this like little town and then is unleashed on the town that it was born out of.
That's what
But you don't
separates it
know.
from, yeah, that's what
You don't
separates him
know
from like
until the
Craven.
end.
Like I don't even think like Freddy Krueger isn't like Lovecraftian to me,
Oh,
honestly.
absolutely
Like
not.
he
He's
comes
too
from a very
easy.
like grounded place in like social politics. Like he comes from a very like real place that you can touch.
That's
Like,
why I've said like it's not a very surreal movie. Like again, I love Nightmare on Elm Street. I think it's a wonderful film, but I also think like it's not that surreal. If it,
no,
like it's really not. Like it's very easy to follow. It's very easy to distinguish like its elements. It's just a fairy tale. But yeah,
I love
compare it
this film to
again.
death. I love Nightmare on Elm Street to death. It's just
Oh, me
it's
too.
so curious. I like I can only really compare Craven to Carpenter, because I don't know who else would be like appropriate to compare these
I don't
people
know.
to. And even then, these two contemporaries making New Nightmare and In the Mouth of Madness around the same exact time had completely different
Hmm.
like concepts of how media influences the world and the ways that we
Hmm.
live, and yet they're
I,
Carpenter's view is fucking so crazy that no one wanted to follow it up. Everyone just
no,
like
no, no, no.
they let Craven lead the way with that one.
It makes sense. I don't know. I feel like if more people watched In the Mouth of Madness in like 2021, they would like it because it seems like the kind of like thing people are into right now, like movies where the layers of reality
Yeah,
and
and it's a
getting
wonderful
confused.
cast too. I was watching this and like my inner 5-year-old was like, "Who the fuck is that? Is that Vigo the fucking Carpathian from Ghostbusters 2?" And it totally was Vigo the Carpathian. I didn't know he did anything else ever. It was so nice to see
Yeah,
him as
it
the
is.
guy who's like he shoots himself in the head because like it's already written. I'm supposed to do this.
It's so great. It's so great. Everything about once they enter the town is great. And I also love the sequence of them entering the town. It's like this 10-minute sequence of them driving in the dark, and you can't see the ground underneath them. You can't see anything
Hmm.
around the car. They're just like in a black void. And the
Oh,
old
Silent
lady
Hill
on.
owes some shit to this film. Silent Hill
Oh, for
owes a
sure.
lot to this movie.
Yeah, for sure. The
I was
old
thinking
lady
about
on the
that a
bike.
lot, especially with like Bicycle Boy, and the only people you do meet are like stranger than fairy tale characters. They don't belong anywhere. They're
No,
just so
they're like
fucking cool.
NPCs in a video game.
Mm-hmm.
They're like yeah, Silent Hill NPCs. They're like, I don't know what you're talking about. We're just living here. Like that, like it's like this is just normal life in Silent Hill in a
To my
Hobbs
memory,
End.
Silent Hill ends up being like a Lovecraftian fucking thing too. Maybe John Carpenter was really big, but like not here. Not here, but we'll feel his presence forever.
Uh, I mean, we know who he's influenced. I played Metal Gear Solid.
Oh yeah,
We,
true.
yeah, Hideo fucking loves that dude to the moon and back. He probably watched the thing like as a I don't know how old he was at the time, probably a
Well,
teenager.
I mean, to my knowledge, those are both Konami games, so maybe that studio is really
Yeah.
into fucking garbage.
We'll find out when he makes his Silent Hill game, which is 100% for sure gonna happen. I absolutely know it. It's definitely not canceled. Um,
In the Mouth of
no,
Madness is just such a wild movie, and I was watching it the whole time. I'm like, yeah, this is what disturbing behavior was for me. Disturbing behavior is just I like out.
yeah,
And this is
I,
Jacob. This is Jacob 100%,
I
maybe
I love the
110%.
misery. I love the misery, and
It's
he's so
it's
good at it.
cheerful though.
It is. It's not as rough as like a Prince of Darkness, because Prince of Darkness does some crazy. Prince of Darkness is like a career statement like a mission of intent for like his entire body of work. You can like figure out everything you need to know about Carpenter just from watching that movie. It has like everything he ever does, even as
Well,
like
the
the
thing with
gods.
like Carpenter too is that like people respect his work now, like right now, like people respect
Yeah,
his work
they're
and see
coming
him
back.
uh, as an important, like nearly legendary type of figure. But I don't think anyone really attempts to engage with his films outside of Halloween and sometimes The Thing on any sort of level that is like
No, and
revealing or interesting.
I've said before, I think he's like a remarkably coherent, or I should say like coherent director over like consistent director, because like that's more consistent is more like a qualitative judgment. I don't care about that. I'm saying more like his films have like a
He's
very unified
philosophically
vision.
consistent.
Yeah, he has
Yeah,
a
yes,
unified vision that is consistent across his
that's what I'm
work.
saying.
And I mean also like even in the way he shoots his films, because no one fucking shoots his movies like him. You know, everyone shoots horror movies. I mean, maybe they try to now. You know, you got your like Ari Asters and stuff trying to do like their God's Eye Kubrick style thing. But like no one was doing that shit other than Carpenter, because everyone else was more like I would say like the Toby Hooper
Like,
template, who's like more about like
frankly,
cutting.
like Carpenter, for all of his flourishes here, like one of the most annoying things about a filmmaker to me is like you brought up Ari Aster. Like I hate when something's overcomposed to the point where I think it's like self-masturbatory. There's nothing overcomposed about Carpenter ever for me.
And
Like
he's always heavily composed, but no, I would
it's
agree he's not
always
over
extremely
composed.
composed, but it's not it always feels right. It always feels like the perfect amount
Hmm.
of style or flourish or just pizzazz. Like I was never annoyed with In the Mouth of Madness that in every 5 minutes, almost like on a like there was a timer going off, it'd get some crazy like Eisensteinian fucking like editing montage of just crazy,
Oh,
just fucking blood in your face.
dude, the montage in this movie itself is like
Mm-hmm.
marvelous. Like it's marvelous. It
Step
again, like I,
aside, Odessa staircase sequence. I got Sutter Kane over here.
it's true though, because like I again like there's I think I mentioned this earlier. There's so many like sequences that repeat, and you get shot like the movie doesn't really flow on a scene by scene basis. There's parts early on where it sort of does, but like after a while, the movie becomes more kind of mood driven, and so it will at the drop of a hat just like put in these weird insert shots, or
Mm-hmm.
you know like I think the real shift is like the again like the car ride into Hobbs End, because you have no sense of space or continuity or even time. Like time
Well, it
stops
deliberately
giving
tells you you
mattering.
can't trust time, but yeah, you can't trust time because Carpenter shows us that young bicycle boy, and then he shows us the bicycle boy again, and it's an old, withered old man. Like time doesn't exist in this
Yeah,
area, and that's perfectly conveyed
it's
right there.
beautiful. I also again like the kind of his camera's perspective is always really fascinating to me. I think it's at its best in Prince of Darkness, again because like Prince of Darkness is a, I mean they're both of these movies are kind of like about people that like the realization that no one has any freedom, like complete lack of freedom. Prince of Darkness more so is about like people that like there's no freedom for them. They are fucked from the start. And even like the people that survive at the end of Prince of Darkness are like, I will never like have any freedom or control over my life. So and I think that's always like really well reflected in the camera, because he does have that. I hate saying like the Kubrick style, but like I feel like that's the best analog for people to understand what I'm saying. Like that kind of not objective, because it's very not objective. It's the furthest possible thing from objective, but it kind of comes off that way. Like it's very specific to, you feel like you're actually looking outside of some malevolent force's eyes most of the time when you're watching a Carpenter movie. Like I think Prince of Darkness, that makes sense because the force is literally invisible, so you can
Yeah.
easily attribute the perspective to the camera. You can say we as viewers, if you want, are like malevolent towards these characters. But I think that works really well here, especially because it's so much of the plot is about John Shred trying to assert his control over his life, his grasp of reality, his grasp of what's happening to him in his own life. And then he gets to the end, and it's like it's wrestling it away from him the whole movie until you get to the end, and it stops giving a fuck about what he feels. Like
Well,
he
yeah, I
literally
think
gets caught between cuts in this movie. Like he'll be like sitting in a place and a cut will happen. He's like, what the fuck just happened? Like that's the kind of shit that happens in this movie. It's like he reacts to the film form in this movie sometimes. It's
I think if that's
crazy.
like if I have any issue with the movie, like it's actually in the movie's like benefit, but it's just so nihilistic to the point that there isn't a value placed on reality. So it's like I don't
No,
care
there's
that
not.
reality has been lost. Like I don't know what
It's
I'm losing.
it's very yeah, Hume in that way. It's very
Yeah.
like what are you gonna do? Like there's
Did we
yeah,
lose something valuable? I don't
it's
know because there seems to be a revelation at the end when we're in
it's
madness in
because
the movie theater.
it's the
It's
all you can trust
liberating
our
too.
it's all you can trust are your senses, but your senses are inconsistent. So you can only know reality through your senses, but your senses are not to be relied on. So what the fuck do? You just give up and die. Like that's basically the movie. Like you can, and again, like it seems to imply that this is like a widespread problem. Even if like
Yeah.
everyone in the world is not having like the John Trent experience, it's still like something that is impacting the world. Like the world is falling apart because no one knows what's real anymore. No one
More
knows like
people
how
believe
to.
in me than believe in the Bible. More people believe in my work than they do in Jesus Christ.
Literally, it's so great. It's so great. Again, that's why I think of like more of like J.K. Rowling than like Stephen King, because people, like the wizard world of Harry Potter is now like its own like cult of personality, like arguably like as big in,
Yeah.
at least in the West, as like Christianity. People get their robes and their memorabilia. They go through the rites. So I do think it kind of it's pretty on the money in its diagnosis of pop culture as its own form of religion, or anti-religion if you'd rather. Like it's
No,
pretty great.
absolutely.
It's so great.
Absolutely. Well, that's another thing that separates that's another barrier for me from like completely interacting with the film, because I really get off to those postmodern teen movies where God is a non-issue. God, now who gives a
Yeah, you don't
fuck
have to
about
worry about it.
God? Yeah, God is just boring. God's been dead. We killed him. Bye. Bye. Scram.
Yeah,
With this one, I
yeah,
have to engage with like the idea of something, like I said,
more.
non-corporeal. I have to engage with the idea of a god or something supernatural, and that's always a block for me because I'm a idiot.
No,
Like,
I have a friend of mine who also loves horror movies, but we disagree about what horror movies we like a lot of the time, not always, but a lot. And we came to the conclusion that the kinds I gravitate towards are the ones that are just like, yup, everything sucks and is horrible, and life is random, and you never know when you're gonna go, and that's it. And I'm like, yeah, pretty much. Like that's why I love Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
yeah,
That's why I love Alien.
both those movies, I think God is a non-issue. God
Yeah,
doesn't come
well,
up.
yeah. I mean, Alien, which I think I mentioned one or two videos back, was like pretty formative for me, along with at the Mountains of Madness, because both are like, yeah, you never know. Maybe the universe. It's not that the universe is indifferent to you. It's worse. It's that the universe actively is trying to murder you. Like
Mhm.
the universe actually just wants you to die. Like works like that, or works like Texas Chainsaw, which is more just, I don't know, maybe you'll trip on a rock and just die. You don't know. Maybe you'll just walk into a house full of cannibals. You don't know. It's shit like that I think I gravitate towards. I don't know. Maybe I should be locked up. But
Exactly.
yeah, no. This kind of fits into that. This
Oh no,
this like
yeah.
you said though is more gleeful about it.
Oh,
It's more
absolutely. Not gleeful to the point of, yeah, the feeling at the end of the film is liberation and elation and a freedom for me, for Sam Neill, you know.
it's some Joker shit.
Yeah, yeah, we live in a society.
No. We live in a society. Well, I mean, Sam Neill comes to the conclusion we do not live in a society. But God, I
I
love
don't know
his.
if Carpenter thinks that any of it is worth preserving. That's the thing, because
Uh,
nothing was good beforehand.
yeah, I feel like he might argue like I don't care. Like I feel like that would be
Yeah.
his response, is like it doesn't matter to me. I'm
Whereas
uh
like Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson do say, wouldn't it be better if like teenage girls weren't killed?
well, Carpenter has always come off like and I've since I really double I always love Carpenter, but I've really like doubled down on him in the past couple of years, again because of Prince of Darkness and in the Mouth of Madness. I've watched so many of his interviews, and the dude is pretty cynical. I gotta say,
Yeah.
like intensely cynical. He's talked a lot. Like people always ask him, like because he's actually, to my understanding, like sort of friends with Rob Zombie, or like collaborated with him before, but he hates his movies. And
Good.
but they asked him, so like, yeah, you didn't like those last ones, why did you do like the soundtrack for the new David Gordon Green one? He's like, oh, it's simple. It's because they paid me. And like he just says this in interviews. He's like interviews meant to promote this movie he worked on, and he's like, I did it for the money. Like he doesn't give a shit. He's like, I don't care, my work doesn't matter. It's completely random if my work is appreciated or not. Sometimes it's hated, sometimes later it's liked. I don't get anything out of it either way, so I don't give a fuck. Like that's basically his worldview. It's pretty endearing in its own way.
It's
The only,
wild that like someone who I think clearly believes in some sort of higher power is so nihilistic. Whereas the ones
yeah.
who I think are atheists like aren't as nihilistic at all.
I mean, I mean, I get like someone like Wes Craven because Wes Craven was raised
That's
pretty
okay, I know.
religious.
Okay, yeah, but Wes
Yeah.
was definitely working from a script written by like
Well,
some postmodern brat atheist kid. Like,
no, I mean, I say that, but like so many of his movies kind of end, even like his non like pre-Scream movies, Wes Craven's movies typically end with some kind of like divine justice in some form or another. What's her name in Friday or Nightmare on Elm Street? Nancy, right?
man,
Yeah, Nancy, she sort of conquers Freddy and then she doesn't. Even I almost said Virgin Spring because it's a remake of Virgin Spring. Last House on the Left ends with obviously like the parents' retribution. So there's always some kind of like
I
value.
wouldn't call it divine like justice. Like Scream wasn't divine justice. It was just,
Yeah, yeah. I guess it depends on perspective to
I
a
think that
degree.
Carpenter's way more divine in his idea of justice and injustice too.
Well, I think it's because things like more of the postmodern stuff kind of is founded on this idea of the world, kind of similar to Toby Hooper's work, which is this idea that the world is random and
Yeah,
unpredictable. And like I said, like John Carpenter's worldview is like, no, there is an order to the
yeah.
world. You just don't like it. You will not like it. What
I
the
think that
or,
that's the thing that I was trying to say earlier. I mean,
yeah.
just now with the believers and stuff. I think I meant like it's weird that the more chaotic philosophy feels more it feels
Because
more
it has more
trustworthy
freedom.
than the one that's like has order. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like an anarchy thing or an anarchic thing. You have, you maybe you'll get fucked, but you also have more room for like freedom. And it's like in Carpenter's vision, there is no freedom. You know,
Exactly.
again, like it's the Michael Myers is a force of evil, but also Michael Myers never could have been anything but Michael Myers. He was born to be Michael Myers, and he will die being Michael Myers. That's all he will ever
What
be. And
exactly
and so
where
it's like, what could
yeah.
you have done? You can't like fix Michael Myers.
Whereas,
He's
like,
just
yeah,
evil.
exactly. The Scream films definitely posit these kids would have been different if they hadn't been
Yeah,
like,
yeah, they could have
like,
been helped. And Carpenter
yeah,
would say, nope, no, they would have done it anyway. They never could have done anything different.
exactly. But there's something that's like, I know that Michael Myers is a physical being, but the whole point of him is that his psychology is unreachable, unknowable. Like,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
can't get inside of it. And Carpenter's a genius because he forces you inside of it with POV shots. Like, there's so many things about Carpenter that's brilliant.
No, he's
And
great. You get the same thing with The Thing, is because like The Thing is like it's kind of funny to go back and re-watch The Thing so often because it still works every time you see it, but you the second you start up the movie and see the credits, you're like, yeah, everyone in this movie dies. But like the
yeah.
suspense mechanics still work. Like the
Which, by the
suspense
way,
mechanics, yeah.
what did the postmodernists do when they completely rip off the thing for the faculty? None of them die. They
Yeah,
all come back to
exactly.
life.
The
No
Thing, they all die.
consequences.
That's such a good ending for The Thing though. It's so great because it's like
It is.
so many
But
people sat in their theater like, I wonder who's gonna live. It's like, no, no one. They
I
all die.
appreciate Carpenter's nihilism. I appreciate his
Oh,
nihilism so much. I'm just glad that the postmodern wave had such a strong hint of sentimentality. I
yeah.
needed
I
it.
guess that's where it differs. Like, I see the nihilist shit. I'm like, yeah, there we go.
I don't
That's
know.
what I want to see.
I like seeing Sydney walk off into the sunset like a stronger archetype.
Like
It
I
needs
said, I consumed the wrong media as a kid. Although we say that, but I watched
although Scream
Aliens.
5 like logically would have to end with her in a movie theater watching all the stab movies, just laughing
Yeah,
herself silly at this
yeah,
point.
exactly. I say this, but like I watched Aliens last night, which is another like Team Jacob classic, and like that's a
I
pretty
love it.
triumphant movie. It's a very triumphant movie, and I felt pretty good at the end. I was like, yeah, I love Ellen Ripley, and then I saw them
Yeah.
go to sleep in the pods. I'm like, damn, three of them die in like the next 5 minutes, and I'm like, canonically, but I don't care. It's easy to watch it self-contained, but yeah, no,
I
Aliens
love
rules.
it.
That's like the one like optimistic horror movie where I'm like, yeah, and and then everything else, like
I
I'm
don't know.
like, John Trent dies like laughing his ass off at his own misfortune, and I'm like, yeah,
Well, optimism is so counterintuitive to horror movies. I think that's why a lot of people, even
in a
Justin,
way.
has like a problem with Scream and things like that. Like
I wouldn't say I have a problem with it.
I don't have any problem. I think that they're perfect movies. I like the
No,
optimism at the
no,
end. I like that it's counterintuitive. I'm just saying a lot of people don't know how to feel about that tonally. Like, am I supposed to be petrified by this movie that just gave me like a happy ending? Like,
hmm. I mean, I don't know. Horror is funny like that because like I sometimes like I'll watch like the most depressing like horror movie ever, and I'll be like, yeah, but I related to some of the material that was in that
I don't.
movie,
It
and so
makes
like
me
I'm like
like
I feel
roll
better
my
about it.
eyes now. I used to roll my eyes at sentimentality, and I still do if it's not within like a postmodern context of like deeply tongue in cheek. But now I roll my eyes at like shit like Midsummer. Like
Yeah, I mean,
the new nihilistic horror movies. It's kind of roll my eyes at like pretty deeply. That seems so easy. Like
yeah,
I can write a story where everyone dies and they're sad, but I can't really write you a story worth sharing with you. Like I think
yeah. I mean, it varies. I guess like a lot of horror today is pretty nihilistic, but it's kind of like nihilistic in a weird way, where it's and I hate being one of those people that's like old horror was better because honestly, I don't. I'm way saltier than I was, or less salty than I was like 3 or 4 years ago. I've kind of gone Carpenter mode where I'm kind of like I don't give a shit anymore. If Hollywood wants to crash and burn, go do your thing. I don't care. But no, I can only say like I don't relate to a lot of recent horror movies. I like some of
yeah.
it. Um, Actually, surprising more to me than anything else, I really liked like Haunting of Hill House, which I thought was like in its own way kind of triumphant. Although I even then I kind of gravitated more to the most depressing aspects of it. But yeah, stuff like Midsummer is kind of just like for me nihilistic without like a link to like why it's nihilistic. It's just kind of
Exactly.
operating on misery. But again, like I'm kind of like, you know what?
I
People
love
watch
some
what they
modern
watch.
horror.
Yeah,
Like I think The Conjuring's amazing, but The Conjuring's a love
yeah,
story. Like it is a deeply
yeah,
sentimental movie.
yeah.
I don't
I
know.
don't.
I don't know. Of course, Carpenter does nihilism perfectly. No one else can do nihilism like he can when it comes to horror. Because we're talking about a deeply nihilistic movie that ends with one of the most liberating scenes I've ever seen.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah. No, for sure, for sure. He's great in that way. It's a it's like it's hard because or weird because it's hard to be depressed by a Carpenter movie. I feel like
mm,
I
yeah.
can't think of any of his movies that have depressed me. Granted, I haven't seen all of them, but I can't say any of them has like depressed me or
Oh
made me
yeah,
like
I'm not saying that
miserable.
this is depressing. I'm just
Oh yeah, no, I
always
agree. I'm saying that more like to say I agree with you because I'm like it is interesting that like he's so pessimistic, but like you never really walk away with this sense of dread. Maybe Halloween. Although I don't think people are scared by Halloween anymore, in a way. But I think that's because people might be engaging with it the wrong way, and I don't know who's to blame for that. I don't think anyone is. But I went to see Halloween once on Halloween in a theater, and it was the heckle crowd type deal.
well,
Like
that's the pure difference, dude. Yeah, that's definitely the difference between postmodernists and nihilists. The nihilist ending of Halloween is disappeared, unending monster, nothing matters. You're gonna be hunted forever.
yeah,
When
but then the
when Kevin Williamson got a hold of Halloween with H2O, they chopped off his fucking head. Not
yeah,
coming back.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
canonically, it comes back in like a
You,
year, but
we talked about this, but like you can see his eyes, you know, before it was just a black
Exactly.
void where there's
Humanizes.
nothing there. Yeah, he's a human. He's just a man, nothing but a man. Whereas before, you know, you shoot him 20 times in the chest and he disappears, and that's the end of your movie.
Well,
Yeah,
it
there's
takes
no
John Carpenter to
resolution.
show like how deeply sentimental the next 10 years of horror would actually be.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
yeah. I mean, but you don't think of those kinds of movies as sentimental movies. You don't think of like I Know What You Did Last Summer as a deeply sentimental film, but stacked against uh In the Mouth of Madness, it sure fucking is.
Hmm.
That's incredible to me. I didn't realize till this conversation that I thought that John Carpenter was such a relentless nihilist, but now I definitely.
No, I mean he's I've been saying it too. I feel like it would probably just be more accurate to say like a pessimist, because I don't know.
A cosmic pessimist, though.
Yeah, yeah, that Eugene Thacker stuff. He's like that. He's like that. He definitely is. Um, the world does have a purpose. It's just or I think if I remember correctly, Eugene Thacker's thing was that humans are not central to the world. So like we are as like moldable by the world as you know, like the environment or animal
Mhm.
populations. We're just a subject to that shit. Like there's no we're not special compared to those things. We're just as much like part of the rabble and part of like the environment as anything else. And therefore just as unimportant in the grand scheme of things. So and you can also I guess like extrapolate from that like stuff about like how you know we go through our emotions just like any other you know animal species, you know, like beavers by the seasons build their dens or their what do you call it to block the water?
Dams.
Dams. Yes, they're dams, and we go to buy the new Sutter Kane novel. So you know you can take from that what you will. But I do think Carpenter, to some extent, subscribes to that kind of worldview. Although it is hard to say like how much he just does it based off like the aesthetic and how much like he actually believes. But I don't know how
I mean,
much
I
that
think it's pretty
matters.
consistent. Even like Big Trouble Little China is such an absurd reality to the point where reality
Yeah,
doesn't matter.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I wouldn't
I
call like
agree.
Big Trouble Little China like nihilistic per se, but there are nihilistic qualities in it. I think, as you said, the most consistently unified vision. Like, reality still doesn't fucking compute in Big Trouble
Oh
Little China.
yeah,
It takes Jack
100%,
Burton
one hundred
all of
percent.
2 seconds to go, people are flying on the street. Like, he understands it very quickly. He accepts it very, very fast.
And how does They Live end? I feel like They Live is somewhat trapped. I haven't seen that movie in like 6 years. That's why I'm like, I don't
Big Trouble
remember.
Little China. I feel like it
Oh
ends with
no,
like a
no, They
monster
Live.
in a truck. Oh, They
No,
Live.
They
I don't
Live.
remember how I haven't seen that one in so long. People love
That's
that movie, but that one's definitely nihilistic and tells you that reality is a lie,
yeah,
almost an
yeah. The
unfixable lie.
culture industry, and also like our main character just shoots a bunch of civilians in public places.
Yep.
It's such a wild movie. Yeah, no, I fucking love Carpenter. The Moon and Back. There's genuinely no one like him. I've gravitated to guys like Hooper recently, but there's genuinely like no one makes movies that look or feel like Carpenter's. He's so unique, so interesting. I used to think of him as more of like a movement and composition based director, but then you watch In the Mouth of Madness and the editing in this movie is insane. The way he chops up and screws up time is insane. So great. It's so great.
No, this is a great movie. This is great. Do you have any closing thoughts?
No, I don't think so. This is not reality.
This is not reality. This
Yeah.
is not reality. This is
Do,
reality.
do you read Sutter Kane?
I thank you guys for watching this video of In the Mouth of Madness. Jacob and I will be back to talk about some more horror movies. We really like extended um, what we talk about, but next time will be a slasher movie at least.
Yeah, yeah, probably. Oh wait, it
Mostly
is. I know
slasher.
what it is. Yeah, yeah, it
Yep.
is. There you go. All right.